So, welcome to lecture number 3. Having taught this course for 15 years now, it's been my experience that this is, trying to think of the way to describe it. Um, Maybe not the most difficult, but probably the most controversial of the lectures that we're going to have. The reason for that is, well, we're doing eco-theology here in addition to eco-criticism. We're going to be exploring religion. And we did that last time too, when we talked about, for example, Gilgamesh's god Shamash and how he allowed Gilgamesh to overturn an earlier religion. I think no matter what I said about Shamash, no one would get very upset. If I said Shamash was, bad, evil god, I don't think anyone would take personal offense. But here we have a different text, and that is we're going to be looking at Genesis. Genesis is not quite as old as the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it is our second oldest text. So Gilgamesh goes back probably around 4,600 years ago when it was first written down. The Hebrew Testament of the Bible, Genesis in particular, is probably the oldest of those books, and could be as old as maybe 3,400 years or so, certainly much older than 3,000 years. But the fascinating thing is, even though it's this very old text, it is still the principal religious text, the text, the first text of whether it's the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Testament for Christianity, or also as it's been brought into Islam. This is the principal text for over 4 billion people on the planet. That's well over half the people on the planet see this as their creation story. So if I were to, and don't worry, I'm not going to speak against the God here, Jehovah or Adonai or Yahweh, is lots of different names. People can and have been in this course, have gotten upset by my doing that. Be very clear, I'm not here to attack Jehovah or this whole tradition, but it is the fact that, environmentalists have looked carefully at Christianity for the very reason that I just said, because it's such an important text to so many people, and they've scrutinized it, and they've raised a number of very good questions. This is not to say, and even though in part of the lecture it may feel that way, that there's no hope to reform this religious tradition that environmentally is problematic. It's not to say that. If you look at 2 of the 3 most influential and well-known environmentalists alive today, Al Gore and the sitting Pope, Pope Francis, both are deeply committed environmentalists who are very concerned about the climate crisis. Al Gore won shared a Nobel Peace Prize for his work, and Pope Francis has been an outspoken advocate for resolving the climate crisis, for mitigating it as best we can. So it's not to say that it's impossible to reconcile Christianity or Judaism or Islam with environmentalism. But it does present a challenge. And, the text that we're going to look at today, Genesis, is where much of the debate over creationism centers. So you may know for 100 years, the United States, creationism has been a big issue. In fact, poll after poll recently have found that if you ask Americans, do they think that, the universe came into being as it is described in the Bible 6,000 years ago, roughly half of Americans agree with that statement, that they believe that they believe in creationism. This is a difficult position to take because obviously the overwhelming, mountain of scientific evidence is for not only evolution, but the fact that, the Big Bang happened, billions of years ago. The Earth didn't form till billions of years ago. Nonetheless, half of Americans believe that it is not correct, that the real creation story is what's in the Bible. So how do you get around that? How do people like both Al Gore and Pope Francis get around it? Neither is ascribed to creationism. Well, it all comes down to how we interpret that text. The issue we talked about at the very first lecture of hermeneutics, of how we interpret it. In fact, hermeneutics basically comes out of biblical exegesis, biblical interpretation. In other words, the text has probably been, interpreted more throughout Western history has been this text, or at least the Hebrew and Christian testaments of the Bible, as well as, the Quran. So that is an enormously, fraught issue, because depending on how you interpret it, if you just want to literally believe exactly what it says, then I think you're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble with a lot of things in the modern world, or trouble is maybe the wrong word. You're going to be faced with difficulties in reconciling the text with something like with evolution, reconciling the text with doing something about the climate crisis. You may also have, difficulties in reconciling the text when it comes to things like LGBTQ plus rights and identity. These are all challenges. But if you have a different interpretive strategy, none of this can be a problem. Creationism doesn't present a problem for the Pope or Al Gore. But it all comes down to what we're focusing on in this class, which is interpretation. So I don't mean to say that, just be very clear, that I think Christianity is just, an enormously problematic religion that we have to get rid of. Nothing of the sort. But what I do think is that things like evolution and, the climate crisis sort of, throw down the gauntlet for folks to interpret that religion and renew it in a different kind of way. If you take a position of sort of a fundamentalist position, you may disagree with that, because there's no interpretation required. The word is the word, and that's all there is. Okay, well, in that case, then this may be a disturbing lecture. I don't know. But I don't mean it to be. I just mean to, and in some ways, maybe the most controversial lecture we're going to have, but maybe the most important, right? Because, influence of Gilgamesh, not so much anymore. Of course, the deforestation and the nature culture diet and all that important. But here we're getting to something that is impacting, as you may know, in particular, like American politics, and has been for quite a while now. But specifically in the last, decade or two, it is impacting how this country acts or fails to act on the climate crisis. But let's jump right into the text, and we can get a better idea of what's going on here. So here we are at our Prezi. Notice we have made a big jump. We were down here, and now we're up here. It's the biggest jump we're going to make during the course. But it's still an ancient text by anybody's standards. So let's jump into this. Here we are. So Genesis. The opening three chapters of the Judeo-Christian Bible and the Quran are perhaps the most influential 2 pages ever written, because they provide the founding myth for these religions and the basis for a variety of ideologies like creationism. It's an amazing number of people that still subscribe to this. No other religion comes anywhere near this on the planet. Not to say that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are the same. They're not. They're very different, and there are all sorts of different flavors within each of those, like in Christianity and all different denominations. Absolutely. But, when it comes to something like this particular text, it's pretty much the same for all these religions, for all these people. And that's astonishing, because ideologically, it is absolutely, the most influential founding myth, certainly on the planet. So, from our point of view, from eco-criticism, they've also shaped Western literature more than any other text. They get repeatedly referenced again and again throughout Western literature, certainly in British and American literature. In the medieval and Renaissance period, they clearly dominate, because by the time we get to medieval period, certainly late medieval period, in England, for example, where English literature is coming from, it is an all-Christian country all the time. And, there are some Jewish people, but they are, as they are in the world today, a great minority. 4 billion people, over 4 billion people are in this Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, but only fewer than 20 million people are Jewish. So it's a great minority today, in fact, as it was in like medieval England. But all sorts of literature is referenced by it. I mean, obvious examples like Milton's Paradise Lost, which we'll be reading part of, that's actually a reinscription, a retelling of the biblical story, except expanded out by Milton. But it's just all over, right? Because, up until certainly the 20th century, Western literature was dominated by this tradition. So, it's not that the culture was just dominated, but literature too. So it gets referenced all the time. It's hard to not find references to it. Yeah. These 3 chapters, and it's just a few pages, right? If you haven't read it, you will read it. It's not a big reading. It's probably, in terms of the text itself, one of the shortest of the whole term. But they profoundly influenced how we think about women, for example. The whole story of Eve in the Garden of Eden is here. And the notion that women are, the source of all evil in the world comes from this. Gender, that we have this sort of binary structure of male and female, and that's just the way it is. That comes out of this. Obviously, creationism comes here. Evil in the world, right? This is the point where sin enters the world. This is original sin, and this is where it's described here. Many people thought throughout history that the original sin was, in fact, sex. That's what Adam was tempted with by Eve. So that's figured out here and laid out. It gets repeated throughout the Bible, but here it's where it's laid out in pretty great detail. Free will, did human beings have the option to resist the fall or not? And that goes into the question of human destiny. Cosmology, it is, of course, a creation myth. Labor, the very clear labor we're going to talk about that Adam has after the fall. Animal rights, we'll talk about that too. That's laid out here. Our notion of deity. This is, of course, a single deity. It's not a polytheistic religion and all, and much, much more. It's all talked about here. So it's really an extraordinarily compact and rich document in that sense. So, yeah. Even if you don't subscribe to those 3 big religions and you're not one of those 4+ billion people, it is so ingrained in our culture and Western culture, in part because of our literature, but in so many ways that these beliefs have often lived on. So perception of women, for example, has been sort of built into the culture over the thousands of years. But this view may come from here, that women are the source of evil in the world and all. You can see why it's very problematic. And you can also see why it does really require interpretation, because if you don't find a way of interpreting around, say, that particular issue, you have a problem. People have, and throughout the tradition. So I mentioned Milton, who writes Paradise Lost, in the 1660s. It's a long time ago, but Milton wouldn't buy into that. So when Milton reimagines the fall, original sin in Paradise Lost, he makes sure that it's not about sex and temptation and about sort of women tempting men. He does that by being very clear that Adam and Eve, in Milton's view, were having sex before the fall. So if that happened, they were having sex before the fall, then sex couldn't have been what brought about the fall. It must be something else in Milton's view, which it is. It's a very clever reading, and Milton feels justified in it because when you look at the text here, it's not very detailed. So you can interpret it the way you want. In a misogynistic patriarchal culture for thousands of years, it was vectored in a certain way toward women. But as Milton, and of course many people after, as you might imagine, have argued, that need not be the case. So, Lynn White Jr. writes this enormously influential article in 1967, which we read. A great deal of thought has been given to Christianity from an environmental perspective because of that. And we're going to talk about that here. But I mention it because, even Milton, I've argued Milton is thinking of environmental issues back in the 1660s, but it's really Lynn White Jr. who puts this on the map. And it was a very influential article that brought about many, many more from there. Yep. So one of the results of that is that people read what White had said and thought about it, and many people just sort of out of hand rejected Christianity. There's a great deal of interest in things like, earth-based religions, like what we read with the Epic of Gilgamesh, but more modern, like Taoism, Shinto, Buddhism, Native American spiritualism, New Age spiritualism. Many of these came on the horizon as being more earth-friendly religions as a consequence. And I think a lot of attention was paid, for example, in the United States to, Native American spiritualism as a result, by environmentalists. Again, and that's not to say that Christianity has to be thrown out, but it is true that historically this is what happened, and it's something worth noting. Yep. Yeah. I want to keep saying this again and again and again, just so that people don't think that, I am trying to attack Christianity here. It is all a hermeneutic issue here, an issue of interpretation. You can interpret this text. Everything that we're going to talk about today can be interpreted in an earth-friendly way. But historically, that will emerge over time, and we're going to see real beginnings of an earth-friendly interpretation of Genesis in particular 400 years ago with Amelia Lanier. So it definitely can. And of course, I keep giving the example of Al Gore and Pope Francis. It clearly can be done, but it has to be done. And in a way, that is the challenge today, which is to interpret Christianity. I think, for many people, the challenge will be, some people, I'm sure, will feel it doesn't need interpretation, but to interpret Christianity as has been done, not only to allow for things like evolution and modern science, but for things like, an environmental ethic within the religion itself, or something, again, like, interpreting it so that LGBTQ plus rights and all can be made to jive with the religion. I think all this can be done, but it can only be done through an interpretive strategy. So the text. You've seen this before. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form. Maybe you haven't, but it's been around a while. This text is repeated a lot, and a lot of people, you'll see, again, all these references throughout Western literature, let there be light, and there was light. You've seen all these. What's interesting, and this is just like with the Epic of Gilgamesh, this can all be interpreted environmentally. So let's jump into this part by part. Chapter 1. So we read the first 3 chapters. Just to be clear, Genesis is constructed of a number of books. The Hebrew Testament, the so-called Old Testament of Christianity, constructed a number of books, Genesis, Exodus, and it goes on. And each of those has chapters in it. And we read the first 3 chapters of somewhat longer text. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's literally the first line, the first chapter. But think about that for a moment. From the very beginning, the Bible postulates a metaphysical God, one who is apart from and superior to the whole of creation. He's metaphysical, similar to Gilgamesh's god Shamash, in that he's not of the earth. So right off the bat, there's a dualism opened up here. There's the metaphysical. That's the realm of this God. He's not from the earth. He's there. Now, there are different traditions, and this can all get very complicated, as you might imagine, that, what did God make the universe out of? Some people subscribe to an ex nihilo, which is Latin for out of nothing, that he went poof and created it out of nothing. Some people say the creation is an ex deo creation, that God created it out of himself, that he was the material that's into it. That potentially is a more earth-friendly reading, by the way, because it suggests that, everything here in this corporeal world is God or from the body of God. But it clearly, though, he is separate in the same way that Shamash is separate. And we'll unfold that a little more to see how that works. To be clear, though, he is very different than an earth deity. So we saw the genus Loki figure of Humbaba in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He's part of the earth. He's a feature of the earth. He's intimately and impossibly separable from the earth. This Judeo-Christian God is not of the earth. He stands apart from it. And in this view, often is imagined as superior to the earth and all of the creation. Now, again, you may interpret that differently. You may say, but no, he's not superior. He's part of it and all. That's true, but that's an interpretive strategy, and it's all coming out of these texts. You have to do it. For much of human history, the prevailing view was God was separate from the earth. The earth is sort of the playground of evil. God has let it unfold the way it's happening, and he stood back from it a little. That's the view. And if you subscribe to that, then it is a very sort of dualistic divide between the physical and the metaphysical. Yeah. So in this view, as it historically has unfolded, there's this rift between the physical and the metaphysical, right? And there are different realms. So there's this realm on earth, which is the physical. And again, this is also often the playground of evil. But there's another realm. That's the realm that God principally inhabits, and that has a name. It's heaven. Where that is, I don't know. And people used to think it was just up, if you go up high enough, you'll get to it. But in later centuries, people have thought of it almost like another dimension or something. But it is clear that's where God is, and he's not here. And there's a rift then between the physical world here and the metaphysical realm of God, and the metaphysical being of God and the physicalness here. Now, he does, in Christian thinking, become incarnate and sends his son, part of this Trinity, here to earth. But that actually underscores that God doesn't come himself. He's separate and apart from it. Even though he walks around in Genesis, it's still, in most of Christian history, seen as a dualistic religion that privileges the metaphysical, that heaven and all is the superior realm over the physical. So, Genesis and the environment. This is Lynn White Jr., that, in antiquity, every tree, every spring, every stream had a genus loci. Before you cut a tree, mined a mountain, or dammed a brook, you had to make nice with the genus loci and keep it placating. But Christianity, according to Lynn White Jr., destroys this pagan animism, and it therefore allows people to do whatever they want in indifference to it. So in other words, when Christianity comes along, historically it does, it encounters religions like the one that was the older religion in the Epic of Gilgamesh that has these genus loci figures, and just like Gilgamesh does, it destroys them. And that's when Lynn White Jr.'s argument. So you can see why I had you start off with Gilgamesh, because that story of Gilgamesh is replayed again and again and again in the colonial era, where Christianity moved throughout the world, and before the modern colonial era, where Christianity moves through the world and encounters these older earth-based religions, and it eradicates them, according to Lynn White Jr. And because these local deities and all were protectors of place, this had huge environmental implications, according to White. So then what Christianity does is what Gilgamesh does to Humbaba. It kills these genus loci. It kills this older religion, and it has to go. And with it, the prohibitions, the things that kept us from exploiting the earth, have to go with it too. So it's a very strong argument made by White. Strong not in the sense of correct, but strong in the sense of a very forceful argument coming from him. Yeah. It was, I always tell students, that when they're writing a course paper, if they only have like 6 or 8 pages to write, that it can still be very powerful and influential, because this story by Lynn White Jr., this essay, is very, very short by comparison. It's like the size of an undergraduate essay, and yet it was enormously influential. It caused people to rethink Christianity, abandon Christianity, consider other religions. It sort of sent shockwaves through. I think other texts might have done the same. I think it's very much of a product of its era, but this one is the one who sort of got there first and drew attention to it most. Yeah. So with the advent of Christianity, according to Lynn White Jr., the genus Loci that had protected nature from man evaporated. Man's effective monopoly on spirit in this world was confirmed, and the old inhibitions to the exploitation of nature crumbled. So that's it. Once the genus Loci figures were destroyed by supplanting these older religions with the new one, Christianity, through the spread of Christianity around the planet, which it did obviously remarkably successfully, because Christianity, I mentioned the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have over 4 million people following. The larger of the three is Christianity by a little bit, Islam coming in second, and Judaism a distant third. But Christianity then was very effective. It became the dominant religion on this planet. And it did that through supplanting local religions, which Lynn White Jr., argues had, profound environmental problems. So how does it do this? Well, Christians are championed by a powerful metaphysical god, just as Gilgamesh was with his god Shamash. They can act, according to White, in a mode of indifference to the environment because the old inhibitions toward the exploitation of nature had crumbled. So in other words, this is a stronger God, a more powerful God, right? So how does Humbaba possibly compare to like Jehovah? What I mean by that, Humbaba is just, his domain is just that relatively small forest in terms of the whole planet. Jehovah brought the universe into existence. And if we know what we know about the universe today with all the, the galaxies, and maybe if there is a multiverse, then in this view, Jehovah brought the multiverse into existence. So how do you possibly compete with that with a little regional god? This god is so powerful, he trumps all other gods. And as a consequence, people shifted over to this new god. And when they did, there was nothing to stop the exploitation of nature in those areas, according to Lynn White Jr. So if there was a local god of a forest like Humbaba, or demigod, and Christianity came along, he went away, just the same way Gilgamesh made him go away. And then, according to Lynn White Jr. and others, you can do whatever you like to the planet. Yeah, so as a consequence, many environmentalists looked for more earth-friendly religions. So once you start thinking of religion in an environmental way, then let's assess other religions, not just Christianity. And things like Native American spiritualism would come right up, because the whole planet was looked after and cared for and all. And we'll get into that in detail. But you could see why alternative traditions were sought, and they became very much of interest to environmentalists. Lynn White Jr. makes an extraordinary statement. The victory of Christianity over paganism was the greatest psychic revolution in the history of our culture. This would not just be environmental, but the fact that Christianity went over the planet and overcame so-called pagan religions. So the word pagan, by the way, comes from Latin, pagos, which actually derives from an earlier Greek word, which means to stick something in the earth, like a stick. So who are the pagans? They're the ones who are stuck in the earth. They're the earth people. They are of the earth. Christians, however, are imagined as being able to ascend to be with God in the metaphysical realm, heaven. So they're not really of the earth. They're here for a while, but their true home is up there. Pagans, this is their only home. That's the way Christianity viewed it. And of course, they tried to convert pagans to Christianity with the allure of the metaphysical realm, that you could surmount death and go to heaven. White sees that as huge in the history of the West. It's the greatest psychic revolution that substitutes a metaphysical God for the physical. The problem, if you approach this the way White does environmentally, is that then there are no physical gods to protect nature anymore. There's no reason to offer up, respect, let alone things, to local deities who are, deity of a stream or a mountain or whatever. So White sees that as incredibly important environmentally. And it's interesting, right? Because we're not talking here about mining practices or deforestation, the way we were with the Epic of Gilgamesh. We're talking about a shift of religion. That's all. A shift of underlying ideology, a shift of way that we comport ourselves and relate to the planet. And to White, that is incredibly important environmentally, and be convinced, many people, as short as this little article was, to subscribe to that view along with him. Yep. To many environmentalists, this was, the decisive moment in Western history when human beings changed the worse for our posture toward the environment. What I mean by that, that's actually worded incorrectly. It's not any one moment, but a whole bunch of moments where Christianity encountered one earth-based religion after another and converted people to Christianity. Since these religions were, and the argument that White makes, more environmentally friendly, this was a huge thing that happened. And the strong statement that you can make regarding all that is that if this hadn't happened, then where would the earth be today? If we had a different, more reverent posture toward the planet, would we be in the predicament we are with respect to the environment and climate right now? It's a question I don't know that anyone can quite answer, but Lynn White Jr. is certainly throwing it out as a question for us to think about. Okay. Let's get into the text itself, chapter 1. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, the fruit tree, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. So why does that matter that God said, let the earth bring forth all life? So not only is this metaphysical God superior to the earth is very clearly here subordinate to this God, obedient to this God, and does his will. So all the natural processes here on earth are ruled by this metaphysical God. So you don't need a whole lot of little demigods. This one God controls everything. He tells the earth what to do. If you don't believe it, we just saw it. He says, let the earth do this. In other words, do this, earth. And the earth did it. And, it sees God as not only separate from nature, if he were separate and indifferent, but as controlling nature himself. And just to be clear about that, that means that this God, we no longer think of like natural processes happening on their own or because of an interconnection or like ecosystems and all that. No, everything is brought about through the will of God, and this is God who animates everything. Yeah, and environmentalists have then warned that such dualism is potentially problematic as it privileges the metaphysical and marginalizes the physical. And potentially finds the environment unimportant, the earth unimportant. We'll get to this further, but the tradition in Christianity is that the end of time, the parousia, when Christ returns, the earth will be destroyed. So this earth doesn't really matter very much in this view. And again, you can interpret it as mattering a great deal. I'm not saying that, but throughout Christian history, the planet again is seen as not very important. This realm, the physical realm, nature, is not very important in this view. Yep. And God said, let's make man in our image after our likeness, and let them, that is human beings, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, over the cattle, over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Yeah, so just to be clear, it's laid out here in detail. Human beings have dominion over all this. They're created by God, and it's basically what's said here is that, God creates human beings, and he basically, we're his favorite of all the creation, and he basically, hands the keys over to us. This is it. You control this planet. This planet is for you. And let me be very clear here. You control every other animal there is. You have dominion over them. They're yours. As you might imagine, environmentalists find this disturbing. But let's go on a little. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. And this passage, if Genesis 1:26, which I just read, hasn't laid it down enough, it's repeated here the way the Bible is put together in most versions. And it's said again, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So it's not like this is just one passage. It's literally repeated twice. If you don't get the idea, get the idea. Human beings have dominion over everything. God gave that to them. Two passages, 126, 128. So, as you might imagine, environmentalists have argued that these verses give human beings dominion over the entire planet. And it postulates the whole Earth and all life on it as being here for and centered on human beings. This is potentially problematic, right? There are no prohibitions here. There's no home baba here to stop us from anything. We've been given the keys. This is our planet. We can do whatever we want. And God, the creator of it, gave it to us. And you can see where this is potentially problematic, especially if you're of the mind that the planet doesn't really matter. If this physical realm doesn't really matter, that, we all should hopefully wind up in heaven after this planet is destroyed. Yeah, why does this planet matter that much? That's the question. I'm not saying you can't interpret it as mattering, but that is the challenge of interpretation here. That's why Lynn White Jr. says Christianity is the most anthropogenic religion the world has ever seen. That's probably his most well-known quote, and you'll see it again and again. And anthropocentric, of course, means centered on human beings, and it is, right? Human beings are given control of the planet. It's very anthropocentric, and White argues there's just no other religion that's anything like this. So let me explain that for a little bit. Anthropocentrism literally means human-centered. That's what the word centrism, centered, anthropo, human. It's a key concept for environmentalists, as it suggests that everything on Earth centered on us. And I think White is probably, correct in asking what other religion quite does that to that extent. But there's an opposite of anthropocentrism, a near opposite, which is biocentrism. And this is the belief that no one form of life, such as human beings, is superior to any other. Because certain Earth-centered religions are almost by definition biocentric, many environmentalists have championed them over Christianity. So you can imagine this, where a religion where all life is sacred, where all life is interconnected. So not only, Native American spiritualism, but Buddhism, arguably, as the Buddha argued it, all life is connected and interconnected. And even to see distinction between life is a delusion in that view. So, from that kind of a religious tradition, this notion that human beings are superior and all is just alien. And White sees that as you might imagine, problematic. So chapter 1, and God blessed them and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and have dominion over every living thing that moveth upon the planet. That's 126. The words here, and we'll go through them quickly, are important. In Hebrew, the word replenish is male, which means to make full or abundant, to fill. So when God says, replenish the earth, he means fill the earth with human beings. As you can see, this is problematic. I'll get to it in a moment. The word subdue, so have dominion of and subdue. Subdue is kabash, which means to subdue by force, to tramp down. It is not a pleasant word. So, you want to interpret that as being pleasant, you can, but in the original Hebrew, it's a pretty negative, sort of dominating language. And the big one is dominion. This word we keep hearing is rada, which is to rule, to dominate, to tread down. And it's important historically, through most of Christian history, that word has been accessible to most people through the Hebrew, through the Latin. And Latin, the word is for dominion is dominus, which is mean to be lord or master. It clearly is controlling, right? It's clearly being sovereign of the planet, and the method of control to tread down, to dominate, is not necessarily friendly. Environmentalists, as you might know, all these words suggest a disturbing posture toward Earth, including male, which means to fill the Earth, is worrisome because it encourages human beings to overpopulate the planet, which has environmental, negative consequences. So what I mean by this is that, you may know that the official position of different sects of Christianity, including Catholicism, were sort of strongly against not only abortion, but then birth control and all as well. And the consequence, if you don't employ these things, that you'll keep filling the planet, and we have, and that is a big problem. We're 7.75 billion people on the planet and increasing daily. It's grown dramatically in the last few decades. When I was born, just about 1960, there were only 3 billion people. We've gone from 3 billion people to 7.75 billion people in my lifetime. This is a problem. So the notion of replenishing the planet and filling it and endorsing a religion that restricts access to birth control and abortion, environmentalists have argued is potentially very worrisome. Yep. So this is the passage again, Genesis 1:28. I just wanted you to see it. That's the second dominion passage. According to Lynn White Jr. and others, these lines are very clear on how we should relate to all life on earth. We are, according to this passage, Lord and Master over all life, which is here just to serve us, right? So that's the anthropocentrism thing, that it's, what's it here for? It's here to make life better for us, to serve us. These animals, they're whatever we want to do with them. If we want to, eat them, we can eat them. We can do whatever we want. God gave them to us, and this view, the way environmentalists see it. So it's potentially problematic. You have to rethink those words, I think. Note, too, that Genesis 1:24 to 27 and then 2:7 recount very different creation stories for human beings and animals, unlike evolution. So in this case, human beings are imagined as created differently from all other animals. They're seen as superior to all other animals and all other life on earth. That's so different than the view of evolution, which is why you can see where evolution conflicts with Christianity if you follow this, word by word. And I guess what I mean by that is evolution, we have a view that we are connected to all life. I mean, you all know this, 80% of our DNA we share with yeast. So even very primitive things are distant relatives. We're all in the same family tree of life on earth. We all share DNA and often a good deal of it. And in some cases with, some primates and all, almost all of our DNA is the same. So there's no different creation story here. We are all the same. We can see commonality. If I step on my dog's foot, my dog, cries out because my dog feels pain the way I do, because our DNA created, a nervous system that's very similar in that regard. So there's no difference here. We are one and the same in many respects. But in this view, in the Christian view, it specifically lays out in detail, human beings are different. They're created different, and they are seen as better. Yep. And this is the thing about be fruitful and multiply and have dominion again. So, yeah. Genesis 1:28. So if you wonder where the debate in Christianity, the Christianity has with things like abortion, it's a very complicated issue, and there's a lot of texts that are sort of martial and defensive of a position against abortion, a pro-life position. But 1:28, has been used again and again that God doesn't want us not to have children. God wants us to, to populate the planet, put it that way. Although, given the extraordinary population growth in the last few decades, it's clearly we're overpopulating the planet right now. But again, if you want to take a strong pro-life position, it often goes back to this text among others. So you can see where, it's embroiled in controversy here. Yep. Yeah, Genesis 1:28 is seen as a problem because, we really need to stabilize the population of this planet. And, to do that, we're going to have to, enlist birth control. It's just going to have to be the way to go about it. Now, again, it depends on the type of Christianity that you have. In this case, Catholicism has a pretty strong position on birth, type of birth control that can be used in abortion. Not all Christianity does that. Not all, denomination does that. There are ways to interpret it to not have that as a difficulty. But, yeah. So Genesis chapter 2, God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So he's formed of dust, and then God breathes into him. This is important. Adam, the name Adam actually comes from Hadama, which is the Hebrew word for earth. Adam is the creature made of earth. Why? Because God literally, fashions him like a potter would out of clay. But then God does something else. He breathes into him life. So for, 2,000 years, Christians, theologians have argued that human beings have a dual nature. Yes, we are of the earth. We are made of the stuff of the earth. No one's denying that. But we have something else, a soul in us, which is different from the earth. And it's clearly different because when we die, that goes to be with God, at least eventually, in the metaphysical realm. So we are both physical, like Adam, made of clay, but we are also metaphysical too. So that's the dualism that's through most of Christianity, through most of its history, has been there. We're going to meet people like John Milton who are monists, who don't buy into it, but most Christians, I think it's pretty safe to say, have been dualists, and many continue to be. In this view, the real human being, right, is the soul. And that's the one that goes home to be with God in the metaphysical realm. And everything on the earth, including the body itself, is potentially illusory, inferior, and even evil, right? So in this view, in the strongest view, the temptations that we have on earth, the things that lead us astray and away from God, are so-called temptations of the flesh. They're the temptations of the body. Things like sex and enjoying food too much and drinking and all. These are things that are totally of the body, but that's not the real human being. The idea is to see the real human being is separate and apart from that as a soul. And that's, again, only temporarily here. That soul will pop out of the body and be with God. But again, that's a very dualistic view, and one which potentially marginalizes the physical, including our own bodies. Yeah, and really what you're doing there is disassociating human beings from our physical earthly nature, which is seen as potentially evil. So instead of celebrating our bodies and celebrating things like sex and enjoying food and all, in this view, this is seen as potentially evil. And then, so it's not just that the planet is potentially bad, but our bodies themselves are. But in this view, it's fortunate that we have this dual nature, because we can get out of these bad bodies and be with God, where those sort of temptations wouldn't exist. So let's talk about dualism. Because the implications of this, of metaphysical dualism, are profound, and they're profound environmentally. So that's what I want to lay out here. If human beings are that, merely visitors here on earth, spirits suffering bondage in physical bodies on a physical planet, while making their way back home to be with God in the distinctly unphysical, unearthly, metaphysical realm, then how much does the earth really matter? In other words, we're not of the earth. We're just temporarily here in this view. And this is not our home, and this is not who we really are. Yes, we are embodied for a time, but that's just more problem than good. It's a lot of temptation and all. What we really need to do is get back home and away from this planet. And how much does the earth really matter at all? Does it matter, right? This is not our home. And actually can encourage a bad attitude toward the earth. So in the strongest view, and again, you don't have to interpret Christianity this way, and the challenge is for modern Christian thinkers to rise to, the challenge of interpreting it in an earth-friendly way, and many are and have. But in the worst possible view, we're like bad hotel guests, right? Like we're people like, yeah, we don't care if we trash the room. This isn't our home. We're not going to be here forever. We're just, going to be, returning home soon to be in our true home, which is with God. So the long-term damage to the planet is sort of inconsequential, because many people, millennial thinkers, have been saying for many hundreds of years now that the parousia, that the return of Christ, the second coming, is at hand, will be very shortly. So why in the world would we worry about, what temperature rise is going to be at the end of the 21st century, when, the second coming is likely going to happen before that, if you're of that belief. Yeah. But in other religions, right, this is the true home. There is no metaphysical realm. This is it. This is all we have. This is all we are. We're just embodied creatures. If you look at that view, well, then how would that, if you're absolutely sure that the year 2100 is going to happen, and if we don't act quickly, that, a whole range of very worrisome consequences are going to happen to the planet because of our actions with respect to, bringing about climate change. If you're really worried, if you believe that the year 2100 is going to happen, and, you have children that may well be alive then, well, I think you're going to really care, in this argument, you'd really care a lot more about preserving the planet because it's the only home we have. You often hear people say that, well, this is the only Earth we have, right? So we have to be careful with it. But in the strongest view here, in a reading of Genesis, yeah, but we have another Earth, or at least another realm that's far better than this one. Why are we worried about this one? We do have another Earth, a better one, a far better realm. You can see the potential problem in the argument. So Genesis chapter 2. And the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. So those words, dress and keep. In Hebrew, dress is abad, which means to work for another, to serve by another by labor, and to keep. Shamar, the other word, to dress and to keep, is to keep, to guard, to keep watch, to protect, to save life. These are different words and a different feel for what it is, right? This is to work for another, to dress and to keep the garden, to guard it, to watch it, to protect it, to save life. Consequently, in contrast to 128, where humans are being given, dominion of the earth and are told that they can tread it down or do whatever they want, some environmentalists have looked at Genesis, 2:15 very favorably, as it suggests that human beings are actually genus Loki, entrusted to protect, and that's Shamar, the planet. That view will become very possible. It emerges at a certain period of time, which is about 400 years ago in Shakespeare's England, in fact. And it grows, which is to see human beings as stewards of the planet, as here to take care of the planet. So in other words, God put human beings here as sort of a test to see how well we could do. And we're supposed to see this amazing creation as something worth protecting and keeping. And that's what we should be doing. That view did not exist through most of Christian history, arguably. Only around 400 years does it emerge. That's not to say that it's not a perfectly viable, translation or interpretation of the Bible. And in fact, that is the view of Christian stewardship that both Al Gore and Pope Francis are clearly, definitely in. So again, it's not that like Al Gore and Pope Francis just out of the blue say, well, we're going to be environmentalists and whatever with Christianity. They actually have their own interpretive strategy by going to texts like this and find justification for the idea that human beings should take care of the planet. It's all interpretation, it really is. Yeah. Interpretation, hermeneutics, plays a major role in understanding this and, in fact, any text. So, of course, interpretation is part of what I do for a living, hermeneutics, trying to understand text. But it really is so important because, you can focus on different parts of the Bible and get one view. You can focus on another passage like 2:15 and come up with a very different, interpretation. Is one right or is wrong? I don't know. But I do know that, the very fact that this text has passages that seemingly are in conflict means that it opens up the challenge of interpretation. That, how do you reconcile 120, 128, and 126 with 2:15? That's a challenge. And, people like the Pope and Al Gore have risen to that challenge. Genesis chapter 3. Long chapter. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. So one of the important things here is first Adam listened to Eve, which he shouldn't have done. He's supposed to be the man who doesn't subordinate himself to the woman in this arguably patriarchal passage. You can read it the way you want. But the other thing is, cursed is the ground for what Adam has done. So let's get into this. And then, what does it mean for the ground to be cursed? Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. So, let me just go one more passage, and then I'll pull these to give her, an overview of what's going on here. In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it thou art fortaken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. So this is a reference to the fact that Adam was fashioned, he's Hadam, he was fashioned out of the red clay, out of earth, and God is telling him here that, through the sweat of thy face, through your own work, you're going to have to make your living. So what's going on here? And this is an important passage because, let's talk a little bit about the fall, what actually happened here. Let me take a drink before I embark on talking about original sin. God says to Adam and Eve, he wants one thing above everything else from them, which is their love and obedience. And he's given them one thing that they can't do in order to prove their obedience. So they can do anything they want on the planet, right? They have dominion. But there's one thing that they can't do, which is eat of this one tree that was put in the garden. And God says, just don't do that. And of course, Satan comes and tempts Eve. We don't really know that it's Satan, by the way. This is another one of those tradition things. It's actually not until John's Revelation, which is the very last book, the sort of the bookend in the Judeo-Christian Bible, that Satan was the serpent. We just know that there's this evil presence, the serpent there. And the serpent tempts Eve, and Eve does the one thing that she wasn't supposed to do, which is to eat of the fruit. And she does. She commits original sin against God. Evil enters the world. There was no evil in the world before. And it's kind of interesting in the tradition, the way most people interpreted Genesis, or many theologians did, they were thinking about all this. Well, there's no evil. There couldn't have been an evil with animals and all too. So originally, even though God had made all the animals, because there's no evolution, right? Everything had to be created. And there were things like tigers and lions and all. They were all vegetarian in this idea. And it wasn't until after the fall that evil entered the world, because, that was seen by many, eating other creatures was seen as an evil thing. And how could there have been evil in the world if evil enters when Adam and Eve do that? So anyhow, Eve has her fall then, but then Adam has a fall when Eve tempts him. This is the thing that becomes a problem with respect to sex, because most theologians thought that Eve tempted Adam with sex. That was his fall. There is no reason, there's little reason to think that, though. I mean, again, people like Milton and plenty of other theologians have said, well, that really doesn't seem like, it doesn't, if you read the passages with an open mind and don't think about the whole patriarchal system we've inherited for thousands of years, read it with an open mind, it isn't clear that it's sex. It's not talking about sex. There's no specific sexual reference or anything like that. So that has given people like Milton the opportunity to suggest, well, maybe it's not sex. But the tradition was seen as that was the problem. So there are consequences to the action. One, evil enters the world, and all the badness that happens on the planet here is caused by this. This nicely explains why there's evil in the world, right? In other words, the Spinoza thing you may have heard is sort of logical proof, which is which doesn't scan logically, which is if God is all good and God is all powerful, then there is no evil in the world, because how could God have allowed evil, created evil and all? Well, God didn't. Human beings brought evil into the world in this view. God created the perfect world we screwed it up. That's the idea. So evil was introduced into the world. There's a second thing, a major consequence, and that is human beings are going to die now. In this original plan, human beings would have lived forever. And Milton actually has them living forever, and earth is changed into heaven, and you just sort of go right up there and live in heaven. But not now. Everything, human beings are all going to die because of this. But worse, everything is going to die. Death has entered the world. So why do, animals die? Why do plants die? Why does everything die? Everything was brought about by human beings. And that's a fascinating idea, because what's really being said here is that at the fall, not only did human beings, bring mortality to themselves, but they also created the planet to enter a period of irretrievable decay. So let me go on and I'll explain that, but I just wanted to give you like a background for it, because that is the problem environmentally. But let's unfold it further. These lines, okay, potentially very misogynistic, the whole temptation by Eve. But let's go through the environmental implications of all this. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. Thorns and a thistle shall it bring forth. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. So what's all this about? This is the punishment that Adam and all of humanity receive because of original sin. After the fall, human beings have a new relationship with the planet, one that's essentially adversarial. Perhaps not surprisingly, environmentalists have found this disturbing. So what do I mean by this? Well, before the fall, the way it's imagined by most Christian thinkers, and again, there's very little here, right, to go on. You have to interpret it to come up with this. But the way it's imagined is the earth was like Mother Earth, a benevolent earth that took care of us, right? It was like this perfect climate, a perfectly fruitful earth. You didn't have to go ahead and practice agriculture and all. When you got hungry, you just walked out and grabbed a piece of fruit, except from that one tree. Don't do that. Or, berries or whatever. And it was, a kind Mother Earth that took care of us. After the fall, God changes everything. If you wonder why, it's so hard to farm and all, and why, you lose crops and all that was brought about by human beings. God didn't want that, according to this view, but God has to punish human beings in this way, in this approach to a religion, and he does by making sure that, we don't have that anymore. We have to earn everything by the sweat of our brow. It used to be easy. It used to be effortless. The earth took care of us. The earth is not going to take care of us anymore. We have to take from the earth. So it's, sort of like the earth just gave gifts to us before and we freely took them. Now it's no longer a gift thing. The earth isn't going to give us anything. We have to take it from the earth. That's potentially adversarial, right? And environmentalists have said, yeah, that's potentially a problem. It's worrisome, right, that, the earth no longer cares for human beings. It's a view that puts us at odds with the planet that, where we're from. Many, many other religions don't subscribe to this. They have the view that human beings, are, in accord with the planet, taken care of by the planet. And, many religions will make offerings to different features of the planet to make sure that the earth is happy and continues to bestow its gifts upon us. That's not the way this works here. Survival is at stake, and human beings have to do what we have to, because the earth isn't going to take care of us. You can see it's a problem. It's not alone in the ancient world. So Hesiod, we're going to read from him. He imagines that human beings had basically a fall from the Golden Age to the Iron Age. And Virgil, so Hesiod is like a contemporary with Homer. A few hundred years later, when the Roman civilization comes on the scene, Virgil also says that, we once had it very easy with like a pastoral way of life, and then we shifted to a georgic where we have to work very hard. In all these three views, the entire earth was once a locus aminus, a paradise that was lost by us. So everything once was great. Whether you read the Hebrew Testament or a Greek writer like Hesiod or a Roman writer, they all postulate that. So that will become sort of ingrained in Western civilization, the fact that there was once a lost paradise, that we lost it, that it didn't happen through some fluke, that two gods got in a fight and we got stuck with this. No, it was us. We did it. We were told not to do it, and we did it. And as a consequence, the earth as a paradise is forever lost and receding fast because it's all dying now, right? Everything is dying. The planet is dying. Cursed is the ground, sweat of the face, you'll have to earn bread. I keep showing these again because I'm going to give another interpretation of this passage as well. Christian thinkers for 2,000 years have argued that because of this, the earth is in an irretrievable state of decay as a result of the biblical fall. Human beings can be saved, not the earth. So you may know in Christianity, a human being can be saved by God, by the act of Jesus's, crucifixion and offering his life. He's paid the debt for our life. So human beings can be saved and go to the metaphysical realm and be with God. On the earth, in the physical realm, the only thing that can do that is human beings. And even then, it's only half of human beings, right? Not the physical body. For most Christian thinkers, that stays here, but the soul gets up there. Very few people have argued, some have, that say animals could also have a soul that goes to heaven. Most Christian theologians thought no. And certainly the planet isn't going to be resurrected. So everything here is going to die, and ultimately the earth is going to burn. The only thing that can be saved is human beings because we are different. So the earth is soon to be a dead orb. It is dying. It has been, in irretrievable decay ever since the fall. It's our fault. We should feel very guilty about that. As we should feel very guilty about what we've done to the planet environmentally in the last 200 or 400 years. But it doesn't change the fact it's dying now. This is a dying planet in this view. John Donne, we're going to read him in the 17th century. I just want to tell you that this is not like an idea that just existed in antiquity. It has from thinkers throughout time. John Donne, a poet in the 17th century, nicely sums it up. The world, in other words, the earth, is but a carcass, a dead planet. Forget this world, and scarce think of it so, as of old clothes cast off a year ago. Don't think about this planet. It's dead. It's dying. Forget it. Think about heaven. Think about being there with God. Think about what you have to do to get there, but don't think about this planet. It's a waste of time in this view. Yeah. People, environmentalists, will often talk about a tipping point where we're going to be add so many enough greenhouse gases into the atmosphere where the whole planet is just going to sort of take off, where the, permafrost is going to melt and release methane in the atmosphere. The North Pole will melt and the planet will absorb more heat. And all this will happen beyond our control. In other words, once we get to a certain point, even if we stopped then, it won't be enough because these things are going to start happening to increase global temperature rise, and there's no way around it. And they call that the tipping point sometimes. Well, in this view, the tipping point happened, 6,000 years ago at the biblical fall. At that point in time, because of human action, it's over for this planet. This planet was doomed. From the moment Eve, reached for that apple and took that first bite, this is a doomed, dead planet or dying planet. Yeah. I do want to note that, that scholars have taken up the challenge by Lynn White, including Jeremy Cohen, who looked at the historical record to see whether, pre-modern Jews and Christians actually believed that they could act in a mode of indifference to the planet. And Cohen argues that no, that human beings were people in the Judeo-Christian tradition were surprisingly respectful of the planet and didn't feel that they had complete dominion to do whatever they want, that they weren't just like hotel guests that could trash the room. Cohen has an interesting book called Be Fertile and Increase, Fill the Earth and Master It, the Ancient and Medieval Career of a Biblical Text. And that, of course, is a reference to what I kept referencing, Genesis 1:28. So there are plenty of works that take up Lynn White Jr.'s challenge and either by looking at the historical record like Cohen or through exegesis, through interpretation, look at the text and show that it can be done differently. So it's certainly by no means, a closed book. In fact, if anything, what Lynn White Jr. did was to open the issue, which is still being played out. So let me give you a final epilogue here. This continues today, so it's not just like John Donne in the 17th century or Lynn White Jr. 50-odd years ago. It's alive and well today, and the debate, if you look for it, you can see it all over the place. For example, in 2007, a group of prominent Christian activists led by a guy named James C. Dobson, he's the founder of an organization called Focus on the Family. He called on the National Association of Evangelicals to dismiss an official who urged the climate change be taken seriously. So already you have a rift there, right? In this, National Association of Evangelicals, evangelical Christians, including a number of them. You had one, official said, well, we really have to take global warming seriously. We have to address the climate crisis as an issue. So clearly people in that group, with that religious belief felt that way. But then you had a counter group, which has become very influential. And Dobson was a very influential guy who says, fire that guy immediately. Anybody who says that, we don't have room for him or our organization, fire it. So within this one very specific, group of Christians, there's already debate going on. And part of the reason that it's political, right? That these individuals felt that their political agenda was being, co-opted by people like Al Gore and other liberals. And Al Gore is such an interesting character because on the one hand, he's clearly very liberal in his ideology and very obviously proactive as an environmentalist. But on the other hand, he's, of this religious tradition. Al Gore actually went to seminary for a while. If you ever wonder why Al Gore has that wonderful speaking voice, is because he actually took classes and learned how to speak like a minister would. So he's clearly in this religious tradition as much as he is in the environmentalism, because it raises this question, which is this essential question: how much does the earth really matter? Is it like John Donne said, like old clothes that we should just discard and not give any more thought to? Or should we think of it, as important as our true home, or at least something that, given to us by God with the expectation that we would take care of it? In some ways, I would argue this may well be the most important question facing us today. And what I mean by that is, and I'll wrap up with this, that, what do we make of the planet on which we live? Well, let's take it, let's ask that question from the perspective of over half of the people who live on the planet, those over 4 billion people who are in, the Jewish, Christian, or Islamic traditions. What do you make of the planet? What, if you're in that tradition? That's an incredibly important question. And the answer to it may mean that on the one hand, you say that we need to take climate change seriously and come out and, defiantly make that public statement. On the other hand, there are people who, feel so strongly that just saying that is reason enough to fire you. It's a really important question. And I think beyond the specifics of that, it drives home the importance of something like, eco-theology, why we need to approach this, the climate crisis and general or environmental crisis from the perspective of religion too. It's not to say we, shouldn't deal with this as, a scientific issue and the rise of certain greenhouse gases and all. Of course we should. But if we think of it only in that way, we might kind of miss what's going on here, because how motivated people might be to act can very much be informed by their religious convictions. If you're the conviction that the earth doesn't matter very much, and if you're a millennial thinker firmly convinced that in the next few decades Christ will be returning and the earth will burn, yeah, it's a question how much you really will care about the earth. It's just provocative to think of this as, in part, a religious issue. We're going to see it again and again throughout the term, because we are charting the course of, and the growth of Western civilization, and Christianity will be, and Islam will be intimately linked with that. So it's just provocative to think about, and something that it's good to not forget, that something like religion can play a role in this, even though it may seem kind of counterintuitive. And I think the only way really to see it clearly is to go through and look at the way that the religion interprets its relationship to the planet, which of course is something that we should all do. Think about our relationship to the planet. Okay, so that's it for today, and hopefully that wasn't too painless or too controversial, because I really do think that this is an interpretation challenge, and it's an and hopefully people like Al Gore and Pope Francis will rise to it in an earth-friendly way. Okay, take care.